On today's video, we're going to be talking about some precautionary measures when it comes to looking at purchasing a used guitar. So without further ado, let's dive in. So maybe you've been browsing the internet, browsing Marketplace, looking for some different listings. You're on the hunt, you're excited about new gear. Want to go over a couple key points to make sure you are well prepared in order to protect yourself when it comes to looking at that next gear purchase. So first things first, I would always recommend when looking at various online sellers is check to see if there is any return policy. You'll always be able to tell at the bottom of every Reverb listing what the return policy is. You may oftentimes find that a lot of sellers do not allow any returns, so always read that policy very carefully. The next thing I would always recommend doing is once you have your eyes on a particular instrument, if everything else kind of passes the check as far as the equipment, the visible condition, the photos, everything is looking pretty safe so far. If they don't have a weight listed of the specific instrument, if this is something where, if you're like myself, a little bit more sensitive about either having a lighter guitar or like a heavier guitar, I would try to get some accurate weight information about the instrument. Just because there's so much variation a lot of times with different types of wood. I've seen instances before where you might hop on Sweetwater, where you have the option to choose between maybe 3 or 4 different serial numbers. You might have 2 guitars in the 6-pound range. You might have a couple others within the same model at the 8-pound range, right? So if you're gonna be standing playing at a gig, right, maybe you wanna preserve your back, your shoulders, you might not want a heavier guitar. So I would fill the seller out, get some information. Sometimes people, if they're very upstanding in their listings, they might even throw it on the scale and take a picture for you. So with that being said, always check to see if you can get the exact weight of the guitar that you're looking at. Something else critically important in my opinion. Now I know some people come from different households, different environments. Some people may be more or less sensitive to this. I myself, I am not a smoker. I have a very tough time being around the smell of cigarette smoke. I really have a tough time if somebody's gonna come up and talk to me close up in my face and they like just smoke a cigarette. I'm just like, ugh, just like dying over here. So for me, again, if you are a person a little bit more sensitive to tobacco and whatnot, I would definitely try to figure out if this guitar is from a smoking or non-smoking environment. When in doubt, I would try to feel out the seller. If they don't have the information posted, just do it in a very polite way. Say, hey, just curious, I have allergies or whatever, just for my best interest, was this in a smoking or non-smoking environment, right? It's very simple. I'm not trying to pick on guys that are smoking, understand, right? Just sometimes that's just kind of a musician thing, but I would definitely prefer if I'm gonna spend my hard-earned money on some gear, especially used, I don't want a guitar from a smoking environment. Okay, the next thing you wanna look at is make sure you have all of your information if there's any modifications or repairs done on the instrument itself. Sometimes people know what they're doing, sometimes they don't. So I try to get some pictures, get as much information as possible. If there's been something done, right, maybe something major like a refret, I wanna get a little bit more details. I wanna know a little bit more about it. Who did it? What kind of fret wire did you get? If you find that the seller, they're kind of just not really able to give you a lot of detail, there's a chance that there may be some concerns. So especially with something major like that, you want to make sure that the fretwork is done right, the frets are seated properly, you don't have like egregious tool marks all over the place. So I would definitely make sure to get as much information as possible as far as any modifications or repairs. This could be something that you might assume to be a little bit more obvious, but I'd always be careful because there are a lot of times you may run across some counterfeit guitars out there. I've seen it, you guys have seen it. Always be careful, get some detailed photos. I would be checking those serial numbers. If you're looking at a particular guitar that's known to be often knocked off by a lot of counterfeit sellers, a good example like the Washburn, like dime guitars. I mean, there's an egregious amount of these floating around, counterfeit replicas for sale. So you want to do your homework on that. It's going to just be a case-by-case thing, knowing what to look for within each model. The last thing you want is to run into a problem where you end up getting ripped off by some scammer. I do see it all the time, sometimes Facebook Marketplace, some shady sellers popping up here and there in groups, and oftentimes people do try to sell fake guitars, so you gotta watch out. So everything we're going over here, very critical, important steps when taking a look at various listings. If you're browsing online, want to try to make sure you get as much information as possible before you make a purchase. Now, once you actually receive the guitar, assuming everything else checks out, you want to really carefully look over the instrument and check for any like major structural issues. Talking about wear and tear, maybe you've got some worn frets. You want to take a look if there's any like major dents, cracks, or chips. deep scratches or gouges that maybe weren't clearly photographed in the listing. Sometimes you'll find a guitar, you might have some cracks in the neck pocket. So anytime you get a used guitar, once you get your hands on it, you always want to look that thing over very carefully. Now, something else to keep in mind when looking at used guitars, or really used anything for that matter, is you need to have fair and realistic expectations. No used guitar is going to be perfect, so I'd always try to educate yourself, get a good understanding as far as different condition ratings. You don't want to set yourself up for disappointment. Look, if the guidelines clarify that very good still has a few scratches, maybe some buckle rash, couple cosmetic issues, that these are all things that you should be expecting within those defined condition ratings. When all said and done, I have no problem buying a used guitar if it's got a couple scratches, dents, or dings. Not the end of the world, but most importantly, you want to really be looking at your structural concerns. Make sure the neck's not warped, you don't have any major problems with relief. You want to make sure that the truss rod's not damaged, or somebody's went in there and like over tightened it, or you've got a loose truss rod. These are all things that you want to be very careful. So again, cosmetic stuff, maybe not that big of a deal depending on the person, but when it comes to structural concerns, that's really where you want to make it a priority. So I hope you guys find this information helpful in your gear searching adventures. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below if you had any good or bad experiences with buying, selling used guitars. Always curious to hear your feedback. That's all for this one. Subscribe for more. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a great day.